Chapter 10. After that, Nathan gave up any pretense at pacing himself. His father's sermon seemed to have made him panicky, and he worked with more urgency than ever. That Sunday night we went to bed at midnight. An hour later, Nathan was still restless, and I swear I heard his fingers drumming on his pillow. I finally sat up and said, "For the love of Christ, will you take the damn guitar and get out of here?" And he was working away in the attic by the time I got to sleep. So much for the deal we'd made. Egan was more intense, too. His manner was sharper, especially with me. I think it was because I'd gotten away from him that night. He hadn't counted on that. It seemed to me that now my presence kept him from concentrating on Nathan. Nate would get into a groove, and Egan would watch, and his lips would part. And then I'd speak, or knock something over out of pretended clumsiness, and Egan would jump and snap at me to be quiet. Paige would look at me anxiously, and I'd wink or grin. The worst thing about that was that it gave me a false sense of security, made me cocky. I still didn't realize what we were up against, that for Egan I was only a temporary setback. And Nathan had become emotionally dependent on him. There was no denying it now. Egan represented Nate's road to salvation, his only hope of making his music work. The Nathan who had walked out when Egan played us that first awful fiddle track was gone. Now he cared what Egan thought, and you could tell it in his work. His voice on these tracks from July is actually shaky. I remember him adjusting, trying something new if Egan frowned or shook his head, throwing out a new suggestion to please him, whereas earlier it had been the other way around. He was still burning bright, still producing an incredible amount of material. But the dynamic changed that week. More and more, Egan was calling the shots. Thursday afternoon was particularly exhausting. We'd only been at it an hour, and Nathan had already started to fade. Egan had forestalled my interventions today by simply putting me in the booth with Nate and telling me to play rhythm on everything. That way, I could only screw up a couple of times without Nathan himself getting annoyed. So by the end of the hour, Egan was at his best again, healthy and enthusiastic, and Nathan was pale and his shoulders drooped. He rested on the couch while Egan and Paige, at the piano, discussed a harmony line. On an impulse, I strolled around behind him and casually, sort of kiddingly, started rubbing his shoulders. I wasn't in the habit of giving back rubs to other guys, understand, but I remembered how this kind of thing could put energy back into him. I hated to feel how bony his shoulders were. Hadn't he been eating better this week? And in my zeal to impart a life spark, I pinched too hard, and he jerked one shoulder and said, "Ow," pointedly. Egan looked around and gave me an amused once-over. "You certainly are one for physical contact, aren't you, Tim?" "Depends on who it is," I said, and kept on rubbing. "Doesn't seem to matter who it is," Egan said, almost absently, making notes on the lyric sheet for Paige. She looked around at me with an exaggerated, "What the hell did that mean?" face. I shook my head and rolled my eyes, and Nathan twitched away from my hands. "Cut it out," he said, but his voice sounded stronger. "Wake up, then," I told him under my breath. "I'm fine," he said back. "By the way," Egan said, coming over to Nathan and me, "a guy from the Tennessean's going to be here Saturday night." "A reviewer?" "You betcha. Their top guy, I think." I wondered if the guy were really interested, or if he were just somebody else Egan had gotten under his mysterious sway. It was getting hard to tell reality from Egan's magic bullshit anymore. "So, Nathan," Egan went on, "I figured we'd go over what you might say, brief you, so you'll be ready for any questions he asks." "I don't want to talk to him," Nathan protested. "Let Tim talk to him. He's a manager." "You're the songwriter," Egan countered. "The guy's going to want to interview you most of all." "I won't know what to say." "Just answer his questions." "No, I can't come up with the words." An edge of panic, always close to the surface this week, sounded in Nathan's voice. "I won't be able to find the right words, and it'll sound stupid." "Don't worry," I said. "Anything you get stuck on, I can fill in." Egan didn't like that. "Putting words in his mouth, you mean?" "If he needs me to," I snapped. "I at least know him well enough to know what his words might be." "So do I," Paige said, and came forward to take over the shoulder rubbing. Nathan leaned his head back against her. "It'll be okay, honey," she told him. "We won't let you get tongue-tied." I was so grateful for her being protective of him, doubly grateful because she didn't really know what was going on. She just instinctively moved in to take care of him anyway. Egan shook his head in mock despair, although I suspected he was furious. "The way the two of you baby him! How's he ever going to learn to get along by himself?" Neither Paige nor I had an answer, but Nathan had revived enough to joke about it. He tipped his head back until he was looking at Paige upside down and grinned. "Yeah, how am I?" he asked, and she bent and kissed him. I smiled innocently at Egan, who lifted an eyebrow and turned away. Foolishly, I figured we'd won that round. Saturday morning at about 5, I woke up just enough to realize I was in trouble. I ached all over, especially my head, and I couldn't get warm. My brain slid hazily through dreams about trivial things, like trying to pick up my guitar case when the handle kept coming off. A bird sang outside the window. Sometimes the sound receded to a tiny whistle, and sometimes it seemed as if the damn bird was inside my head. I huddled under the covers and tried to keep on sleeping so I wouldn't feel the hateful shivers low in my back. My mother's voice paraded through my brain, and Brother Whitley's was in there somewhere, and then Egan's, quick and decisive, like a surgeon's knife. Then it was bright daylight, and I saw Nathan standing beside the bed, already dressed. "Tim, wake up." I shut my eyes again because the light from the window made my head hurt. "You were muttering," he said. "It's after 10, man. We need to get cracking over at the church." I only groaned. "Tim?" Nathan said from very far away, and then I felt his hand on my forehead, cool as water. "Shit," he said respectfully, and the next thing I knew, Mrs. Whitley was there. Her hands felt cool, too, and she took my temperature. "Oh, mercy," she said, 103. Then she gave me aspirin and water, after asking me if my throat hurt and if my stomach hurt. I said no both times and tried to sleep some more. But oh, there is nothing like fever dreams to take you down to the pit of hell. Things I had really hoped I'd forgotten, like being little and my mom being drunk, or one of her boyfriends slapping me until I found myself fighting the covers to get away. Then he would change into Egan, who in turn would morph into all these horrible faces, and Nathan was always behind him somewhere and couldn't hear me. And the feeling was the same, no matter what the dream was, a murky terror that never resolved into anything, but just lurked, threatening. Still, Mrs. Whitley was there, trying to feed me soup and making me drink water. She put a cold washcloth on my eyes, which felt like 2 fireballs, and my head cleared for a little while. Once I looked toward the door and saw Nathan, frowning at me worriedly. "What time is it?" I asked him. "About 4, he said. "I'll be up pretty soon. I know that reviewer's coming." "You are not going anywhere," Mrs. Whitley said, and now Nathan was gone and the lamp beside my bed was on, and I panicked when I realized it was nighttime. "No, I have to," I said. "We have to do the gig, see, and the guy from the Tennessean's coming." I was sort of babbling at her, but I was temporarily in my right mind, the fever having gone down and my hair wet with sweat. Mrs. Whitley was trying to calm me down and wipe my face and change my pillowcase all at the same time. "Nathan, come talk to him," she called finally, and Nathan came in and looked at me dubiously. "Where are my jeans?" I asked him, trying to sit up. "Tim, look," he said. "Egan called, and when I told him you were sick, he said for you not to worry about it." "Yeah, I'll bet." "And that Paige and I could be a twosome tonight. If you're sick, you can't help it." "Nathan, come on, don't go without me." The feeling of dread and terror that had lurked in all those fever dreams was still with me. I was so afraid something terrible was going to happen. "Let me just get in the shower," I pleaded. "I'll be okay." I actually got to my feet, but the aches and head pain hit me so hard I had to collapse back on the bed and shut my eyes. "I've got to go ahead and leave, Tim," Nathan said. "Just take it easy." His voice buzzed away at the end, and through my hopelessness I felt the shivery feeling as the fever started to spike again. And that onslaught, I remember, was the worst of it, the walls rushing in at me and back again, and rattlesnakes all over me. I must have been yelling for Nathan at one point, because I heard Mrs. Whitley saying, "Honey, Nathan's all right. He's all right." But it seemed to me that he was lost, and I had to find him, except I couldn't get out of bed. Then Brother Whitley was there, his shirt sleeves rolled up. The sharp smell of rubbing alcohol pierced my brain, and I felt its coldness on my arms and shoulders and legs. I heard Brother and Mrs. Whitley talking, their worried voices roaring close and then receding. As the alcohol bath did its work, my head cleared enough to hear them murmuring about the hospital in Kirbyville. "I don't want to go to a hospital," I said. "Son, your fever's too high," Brother Whitley said. "No, it's going down now. I can feel it." Going to a hospital would be the last giving in somehow. I had to hang on and stay here, so I'd be here when Nathan got home from River House. "It's just the flu. I've had it before, so I know, and they can't do anything for flu at a hospital anyway because it's a virus." They were both looking at me as if I were still raving, but at least I could see them clearly, and the walls had stopped moving. "Please," I said, "I'll be okay. Just let me have some more aspirin." So they did, and I actually managed to sleep a little, real sleep, without such awful dreams. And the next time I woke up, Nathan was in the room, setting the ovation in its case against the wall. When he saw me looking at him, he gave me a brilliant smile. "Hey, how you doing?" "Better." I sat up cautiously. "What's the word? How'd it go?" "Oh, it was incredible. The guy was really nice, and he had a lot of good things to say about me and asked me a lot of questions." Nathan paced across the room and back, fiddling with stuff on the dresser, stopping to take off his shoes. I'd never seen him so active. "You know, Tim, it was really weird. I was so nervous earlier about what to say to him, but we had this really good conversation. Stuff just sort of came rolling off my tongue, you know." He came over and stood beside my bed. The lamplight shone full on his face, which looked white and sort of shiny. And I played better than I ever have, and my voice was just fine, and it felt great, Tim. It was so great. His eyes looked almost black, and I realized his pupils were dilated. "What have you been taking?" I asked him. "Huh? I haven't taken anything. What do you mean?" "You're hopped up on something. You're never like this." "I am not hopped up," he said. "I just had a few beers." A few beers, spiked with speed, courtesy of the riverman. My head started to ache again, but at least the fever wasn't creeping back. I just felt exhausted all of a sudden and lay back down. "Hey, can I get you anything?" he asked. "You hungry? Did you eat? You need some more aspirin?" He was going to drive me crazy before he came down off whatever he was on. I figured I might as well let him talk. "I'm fine," I said, my arm across my eyes to shut out the light. "How'd Paige do?" "Paige wasn't there either. It was the weirdest thing, you and she both having troubles tonight. Egan said she called and told him she had car trouble and wouldn't be there either." I took my arm away. "You were there by yourself?" Nathan gave me a speeded-up version of his usual exasperated look. "You don't have much faith in me, do you? You think I can't function without you and Paige along? Well, you should have seen me tonight and heard me. That's all I have to say." "I'm sure you were great. Is Paige all right?" "I didn't talk to her, but Egan said she's fine. She just couldn't get there, and so he told her not to worry about it. He said to me, 'You're on your own,' and there wasn't anything else to do, so I just got up there and did it, and everybody was so great and encouraging." He rattled on, walking the floor, telling me about every song he'd done, describing the reviewer, while I put my arm back over my eyes and tried to figure out what was going on. Of course, it was no coincidence that neither Paige nor I had been able to get to River House. But why had Egan gone to such lengths to keep us away? He might have known I'd catch on to the spiked beers, but Paige? What did he have up his sleeve this time? I was too tired to think. Sometime during the night, Nathan's voice wound down, and he crashed. I woke up to see him flung across his bed with his clothes on, the TV screen flickering. I got up and turned it off and took some more aspirin and lay back down, finally trusting in something, it seems, as I look back now, to keep us both safe and let us rest until morning. I felt better the next morning, except for being tired and shaky. I was awake when Mrs. Whitley came up, but Nathan was still zonked. She made sure I had no more fever and looked worriedly over at Nathan. He didn't even take his clothes off. What was he doing, trying to sit up with you all night? Basically, I said. She felt his forehead too. Well, at least he hasn't got a fever. Yet. We'll go on to church and you boys just stay here and rest. Before they left, Artis brought me tea and toast and orange juice. She looked at me as if she'd like to feel my forehead just for the hell of it, and rolled her eyes at Nathan's inert form as she left. I ate my breakfast and hit the shower, which felt terrific, but by the time I got out, my legs were shaking and I had to go lie back down. It frightened me to realize just how sick and helpless I'd been, knocked flat simply because Egan wanted me to be. I wondered why he hadn't gone ahead and completely done away with Paige and me, killed us off. Now I believe it was simply because we didn't let him. Egan could never have switched and fed off me the way he fed off Nate because I was on to him, because I already knew, deep inside me, that he was something that had come out of the crevice in that old lady's field along with all the rattlesnakes. To keep from thinking, I got one of Nathan's old Tom Swift books and read about Tom and his flying lab until I heard a groan from the next bed. I smiled grimly. Nothing like a speed hangover. Nathan, I said, you okay? Oh, shit, he said. Uh-huh. Want some aspirin? I think I've got what you had, he said faintly. I knew he didn't, but I got up to do the obligatory forehead feel. His was cool and damp. No fever, I told him. He closed his eyes and moaned, and I went down to make him a cup of tea, not sure I was going to make it back up the steps. I gave him some aspirin and lay back down, sweating. We were a pair, I tell you, the twins of physical incapacitation. I wondered how Paige was. We didn't talk. Nate was too sick. Tom Swift kept my mind occupied, except when Nathan would groan. It wouldn't have done any good to talk anyway. He would never have believed Egan would spike his drinks, and would only start to mistrust me if I suggested it. Things seemed more normal when the family came back from church. Mrs. Whitley and Artis brought up soup and sandwiches for our lunch, and I was grateful not to have to get up. Nathan wasn't grateful for anything. He wouldn't even sit up, and his mother sighed. You're coming down with it too, aren't you, honey? She said. Well, I'll leave the tray here in case you change your mind. After she went downstairs, I said, You're going to sit up and eat some of that soup if I have to beat the crap out of you. Shut up, he said. I got up and went over to his bed. You will feel better if you eat the soup, I said, enunciating carefully. Trust me. Apparently he still did, because he hauled himself slowly to a sitting position, and I helped him settle the tray in his lap. I started to wonder if I was going to have to feed him, until he took the spoon and managed to get some of the chicken broth into his mouth. He looked like hell, the skin around his eyes almost black, and the rest of his face a sickly white. Even his hair looked dull. It made me sick to think of Egan hopping him up on the Lord only knew what kind of drug cocktail, making him burn bright all evening long, and feeding off him. I bet Egan looked fine and healthy today, damn him. Sandwich, I snapped. Nathan shuddered at the bread and peanut butter, but he took a bite and then another one. In a minute he seemed to be eating with some appetite, and I went back over and ate my own lunch. The idea that food was our only defense against Egan was a bit scary, to say the least, but we could at least stay as physically fortified as possible. The afternoon passed quietly, me and Tom Swift's adventures cocooned in one bed and Nate asleep again in the other. I remember feeling as if I never wanted to leave that bed, that room, because once we did, things would get unbearably confusing and hard. Mrs. Whitley came up once to see if we needed anything and felt Nate's head again. I don't understand it, she said to me. You had the fever and aches and headache, but no sore throat or head cold or earache or stomach ache. And Nathan doesn't even have a fever. This is the strangest sickness. A little later I heard the phone ring in the upstairs hall. Then Brother Whitley called up cautiously from the foot of the staircase. Nathan, you awake? Paige is on the phone. I got up and went into the hall. Nate's asleep. I'll talk to her. I grabbed the phone. Paige, it's me. Tim, is Nathan sick? Sort of. He'll be okay. How are you? She sighed. Oh, I just feel like such an idiot. So what happened last night? I went shopping in Kirbyville for something new to wear on the gig. Her voice thickened. She was already starting to cry. And I planned it so I'd have plenty of time to get home and change. But when I tried to start the car at the shopping center, it was just dead. Really? So this guy jumped the battery and it still wouldn't start. And I called my mom and she said my dad was in Pulaski, so she didn't have our other car. Paige was crying openly now. It surprised me how this had upset her. And I tried to call Nathan, but nobody answered. Nobody answered? The phone rang and rang. Where were you guys? I tried until about 8 o'clock. We were here. Something must have been wrong with the phone. It never rang. Well, anyway, I was about to cry, and I tried to call Egan, but when I called information, they said the number wasn't listed. So I could not do a damn thing but sit in the damn car and try to start it and wait for my dad to come get me, which he did at about 10. And when he tried to start my car, it started perfectly. No kidding. Yeah, and I cried all the way back to Berry Springs, and by then it was so late I was scared to come on to the gig. I figured by then you had all dealt with it, and I was afraid Egan would yell at me. That surprised me, too. I hadn't thought Paige was so easily intimidated. I would have figured she'd show up grimly for the last part of the gig, even if it was close to midnight. But something else worried me more. You mean you never actually talked to Egan? No, He told Nate you'd had car trouble and wouldn't be there. Paige's surprise cut through the tears in her voice. He did? He sure did. Well, he must have called my mom then and found out, Paige said, but she didn't tell me. So you guys managed without me? I wasn't there either. What? I was sick. High fever. I tried, but I couldn't even stand up. But it's gone today? Has Nathan got it? He doesn't have the fever part, but he sure doesn't feel good. So he was there all by himself last night? He said it went fine, and the reviewer was really nice and liked him. All of a sudden, I was so tired. Oh, Paige moaned, I bet Egan's furious at both of us now. Ha, I thought. Egan was probably perfectly happy that everything had gone according to plan. Don't worry about it. You are sick, Paige said. You sound wiped out. Go back to bed and tell Nathan I love him, and I'll talk to him tomorrow. I wondered if Nathan had ever told Paige he loved her. As I went back to bed, I wished childishly that she was here right now, somehow putting life and health back into both of us. In other days, I never saw the bars. I could touch the moon and feel the stars. Never wondered how the mountains grew, and never wondered how the tune came through. The ache of time has bent my hand. The stars I touch sift through like sand. Now I'm asking for to find my way. Now the tune's for someone else to say. And all my life rests on a frown. The steps I take may bring me down. Now the hard part is to see it through. Now the moon and stars come down from you. This song lilts along in a fast 6/8, skimming like a waltz across the tips of grass in a meadow. The music provides such a joyful contrast to the troubled lyrics, which take on new meaning for me as I consider them now. But is the song about God or the riverman? At this point, I realize Nathan may already have had the two confused. At any rate, because of his own insecurity and need, he'd made the mistake of trusting Egan. He had opened himself up to Egan in a way Paige and I never had, and that made all the difference. I have to make that clear. In some terrible way, what happened to Nathan was his own choice.